So here we are. It's been a while since we've chatted. Let's talk a little bit about JobBoardly, where we're at on the platform and how things are going. Where are we at?
Yeah, we've since we last talked, probably we have we didn't really have anything at all, did we?
No.
And we went through like I don't know, three or four iterations on like what is the flow of signing up and posting a job like. And I like where we landed, and it's kind of a four-step wizard of um the job details, the company details, a preview, and the checkout page. And we haven't finished the checkout page, but everything else is functional. And this morning I just deployed it to production. So
Nice.
we now have that live at jobboardly.com, and some of the workflow, like when you're creating a job board, needs to get improved. Still says the Jumpstart logo on there too.
Yeah, we got
But
to update some of those things.
we're getting there. So the job boards themselves have their own subdomains. Those are wired up. Jobs.gorails.com is running on JobBoardly in production, which is cool. I had to fix a little thing on that because the way the Jumpstart custom domain switching works is by domain, but domains don't include the first subdomain. So I had to add an additional thing there to make sure that that was included. So I'll probably update that in Jumpstart Pro itself, just so that's out of the box. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Like,
Hmm.
I hadn't used that feature in production, but the first time I do, then it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't work the way I would expect it to. It's funny how that works.
Yeah, and we want to be able to theme this based on your color scheme here. So we have your red here, and we should probably implement
Yep.
it so that that's carried through on all the buttons. We can hard code that for now, but we'll want to be able to do that, custom for each job board. And then like let's just kind of show exactly what we were talking about here. So we have these broken down into steps where you can put in your job details, company details, a preview of the actual job itself, and then a purchase. So it kind of takes you through each step. What I like about this, and I've been thinking about growth a ton because of the growth course I'm working on, but it's just the idea that we can break these down into tiny chunks. And when you're working on improving things, like that's the best way to figure stuff out is to break things into chunks. So the more chunked out that we can get things, the better insights we can get in terms of the things that we can improve over time. And this is a very simple form. It's not like we're going to lose tons of people during this process, but it's nice that we have it chunked in a way that like we can actually track that. We can actually see the progression of how people go through this. So I think that's really good.
Yep. Yep. And this is something that we debated a lot on, do we build it the full platform for version 1 or
Yep.
just make this very Rails specific? And it's ended up kind of a little bit Rails specific because of the headers there. I noticed we have that probably hard coded to
Yep.
hire Rails developers. And we'll go back and tweak that stuff so you can kind of customize it and whatever. But that it's one of those things where you need a specific use case to run with to get started, and then you can work backwards from this needs to be customized and that does, and so on. If you try and do that all from the beginning, we got overwhelmed trying to do that, so we ended up worrying about, do we just build a one-off thing for Go Rails? And at the end of the day, we decided not to because it wasn't that bad, but it was showing its teeth of like how many little features we'd have to build that were polished for the platform version. So it's kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah. I think that's
it,
something that it's easy to underestimate when you're going to build any sort of project, but it's like, oh yeah, this should be trivial or
it
whatever.
should
This
be, yeah.
right. This seems easy, right? And I think that even in this case, it's a form it's a form that's attached to a platform so people can be able to use it. And even that has its complexities, and we're looking at adding billing on top of that, and that's going to make things complex too. So Yeah, it's just nothing is ever as simple or as easy as you think it is when it comes to those types of things, building anything. And so I think it's funny how you and I even fell into that trap a little bit of like, where's the cutoff point here? Like, how far do you go with customization? How much do we just want to ship this out the door and get it done for Rails customers to use? And the answer has kind of been pushing us more towards, let's get this thing done so we can get some people posting their jobs, because people are asking, people want to post their jobs. So let's get that done, and then we can look at actually making it more customizable for other people in the future. But it's a hard balance, man. There's always trade-offs. And I think that's what's really interesting to me about building is you start every new project thinking like, oh, it'll be a little bit different this time. Like it'll be easier, it'll be simpler. And it is in some ways, but in some other ways, it's just like not. It's just you still have to wrestle with all that crap.
Yeah, you have to like draw the line on a ton of things
Yep.
because you could easily build. It's like that one example of the MVP stages where it's like don't start with a just tires and a
Oh yeah.
frame, like start with a skateboard, then a bicycle, then a car, and whatever. And that's like the direction we're going, where it's like, yeah, it's useful, but really only useful for me right now,
Yep.
unless you're creating another Rails job board. But we'll make that configurable, and then it'll be something we can use for anything else. So yeah, there's just like an infinite amount of things you could do, and I think that's the hard part where we got bogged down and we didn't record because we were like frustrated with that, where it was like, do we build this now? Do we not? Like we
Yeah.
had we had 3 weeks or whatever of that where it was just, do we do this now? Do we do it later? Do we even do it at all?
Yeah.
And that applied to every feature we did, which
Yep.
is like, do we need company logos or not? Do we need the company in a separate step? Do we do it all at once in one form? Do we even charge right now? Do we do previews? Like every piece of that. And then you think about, what if I'm a Shopify and I want to post like 40 jobs? What do you do? And then you're like, what if the recruiter who's posting these jobs wants to manage them all in one UI or something? We're
Yeah.
like, nah, no,
Yep.
because then you get into the complexity of like the subdomains are an account of the parent application, but then do the people posting jobs have an account, and is that a child account of the parent, and so on? And we're like, nah, let's not deal with that. Let's just have them email the link with the token. They can edit, and that's it. You know,
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the decisions we made there, because you just hit a lot of the things that we talked about. So we ended up going with a token for unique URL to be able to edit instead of accounts for each company or each person that's creating jobs. And you could definitely go the route of creating accounts that belong to the subdomain, in this case, Go Rails. And then Shopify could have their own account and manage all their job listings. You could definitely go that route, but that was probably, it would add too much complexity. Um, we felt like it just wasn't worth it for this first version. And then we also talked about like adding companies. So initially, companies was just like a field that we were just going to throw on there. And then we changed that into creating an actual company record and associating that with the job. So that made that more complex. And we talked, even initially, we had a job seeker model, which was, anybody who is looking for work, and we're going to be able to collect all of that information. So we've gone through a decent amount of iteration already. And it is funny how, without getting into the world and people using it, it's just so easy to get caught up on all these things, and you have to think about some of them, but some of them you could probably just push till later. And it's just really hard to make that call. It's funny how I think back on the last few weeks or whatever, and that's just like there's been a lot of that. And obviously you and I are juggling other things too, so this isn't our full-time thing, which makes it more difficult to make progress as well. But I think that like it's just harder. It's just hard always, and it's never going to be
it's
easy.
super hard. Well, here's the
So
thing, like the second you get into any of these features, it gets tough because yeah, you can collect listing information, but what if there's two jobs for the same company? Do you want to like share their company info or the logo or whatever?
Hmm.
And obviously, like from a filling out the form, you don't care. It's not that big of a deal to type in the same info twice. But the problem then becomes we can do that, but then users should be able to see all of the jobs that Basecamp has or Shopify has or whatever. And then we really need like one copy of the company. And
Hmm.
so it is complicated because we have to figure out, how to deduplicate that if we're going to collect the information twice. And then it's weird to fill out a job listing and then search for an existing company or create a new one. And like that's strange. So we don't really want to do that. And, all of a sudden you start to realize like the designs of the UI are hiding so much complexity. And that's like 99% of the time is that's what happens. Your designer is like imagining something, but not totally,
Hmm.
And like even looking at an app, um, you're not going to realize that stuff, until you start to implement it and you're like, huh, what do we do with companies? We either get a bunch of duplicate companies or we have one and a strange user experience. What do we do?
Yeah.
And that tripped us up because it you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, you fill out your job, you fill out your company, you move on, and then you do it again. And when it comes to building it, it's not that simple, and it's interesting to see those things crop up and then have to make decisions on it. Um, and you have to worry about that's what we were worrying about was the juggling of it. What is more important, the user experience or the simplicity of the back end? And like
Right.
we didn't want either one of those to be compromised that much, so we ended up doing the deduplication thing. It won't be perfect, but it'll be pretty good, and we can
Yep.
manually tweak companies if we need to, but that makes a simple back end and a simple front end for the most part. And that's the right balance to hit, I feel like. But
That's
it's
what you
it's
want. That's what you're
fascinating.
always shooting for is, the simplicity on both ends. I think sometimes as programmers or, like it's easy to just be like, yeah, let's just like pick the simplest way from because we know the debt or the potential like hiccups that you could run into down the road. It's like, let's not open that can yet. For example, I think the best example of this is like company user profiles, because what that could spin into is like, well, what if they want to have other team members involved? Like now is that like, and do they have different roles in terms of like what they can edit and all that kind of stuff? And it's like, no, okay, like no, too far.
Yeah.
Like that is too far to go on this iteration. And but
Right.
like it's easy to go down that path because in your head as you're building it, it's like, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it like how we're going to go in the end. Like I might as well like set it up right from the start. And I think there's this weird balance of creating the right architecture so that you can do this. I think I saw Ben Ornstein share something about this recently about like how you should like always like build with has manys if you can.
Uh,
Um, did you
yeah,
see
it
that?
was what's his name? SWYX.
Yeah,
Uh yeah, I just read that. It's a great article. And
yeah,
it was saying that like if you've ever built something going from the Peter Thiel book 0 to 1, like that's hard, and then going from 1 to 2 is actually, or 1 to plural is like also super duper hard. And in programming, like that's what you should do from day 1. Even if you only show one
yep.
whatever, then you should program for that.
Yeah, I'm glad we did that with Zoom Shift. We had like multiple tiers of the relationships kind of there. So we had like memberships and then we had assignments that were like the actual records that were being associated with shifts and timesheets and stuff like that. And it was really nice to have that extra layer, but it did make everything more complex. And I remember at certain points of that, just being like, gosh, like we have all of this stuff like that we've hidden away from the user to keep things simple, but there's all this extra power because of the way we've architected it. And it just makes things more complicated on the back end. And so, it kind of gets to what we were talking about before with the what we were looking at before, those objects with Rails that they use with like the buckets and all that
The
kind of stuff.
delegated type
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, the delegated type stuff. So there's overhead there, but then it's like, oh, look at all these other benefits that you get with setting that architecture. So there's this fine line of like creating an architecture that's going to be simpler to update and keep in line in the future versus just building what you need now. It's such a
Yep.
hard thing.
Yep.
I still get this wrong all the time. And so I think it's really interesting to look at and be like, it's tough. It's hard.
Yeah. 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 It is not an easy one to balance because you don't want to bog yourself down in the early days, especially if you're not going to, you know, it's unlikely that we're going to be super excited and, have a giant success with this job board stuff. But, we don't want to spend too much time engineering this because it's just not going to be worth it. But, um, you also don't want to do it poorly. So if you do end up using it a lot, you don't want to have to maintain something that's just downright terrible. So there's that tough balance. And we decided, like, instead of doing all the accounts for the company users and stuff, like send them an email that will have the token. They can forward that to anybody on their team and anyone can edit it. So, it's kind of like a Craigslist style editing.
Yep.
So you can forward that along and it's not going to stop anyone from using it as if they had team accounts. They just don't. That's it. So it works the same conceptually or accomplishes the same goals, but it's a very, very simple implementation instead, which is
Yep.
so.
I like it. So now
Yeah.
what we have left is like the pay portion of it. And then I think we should be ready for prime time. We should be able to start collecting jobs, which I'm really excited to see some of those things out there. Um,
Yep.
do,
I've
do we know
already
what are we going to charge for a job posting? Are we going to try to seed it initially?
um probably seed. Yeah. I actually just manually sold a job ad, which was fun. So like whatever happened in the last month, people were hiring again for Rails devs quite a bit. And someone Saturday DM'd me on Twitter about a job ad as well. And so I think we're gonna post jobs for like $2.99 for a month or something. Um, and then also include them in like the Remote Ruby podcast, which I think will be really nice. So anybody listening to that will be able to hear that, and I'll send the jobs out on the Go Rails email list and stuff, not just the job board, which will be nice to get some distribution. Um, so yeah,
You're gonna mention them on the podcast, like the actual listings.
yeah, I think so.
Cool. That's
I think
awesome.
it'll be interesting because it's a nice way to keep people informed. I think that'll be kind of neat to see. It's not a lot different than a regular podcast ad, anyways. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, hey, these people are hiring. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Like that'll probably be an optional thing because at some point, if we get too many, then it'll be like,
You're reading down a list of like 50 jobs.
yeah. So we'll like do one or whatever per week. But I thought that was kind of interesting. That's several people asked for that, because they know that we get whatever listenership and stuff, and it's a more human way of um, distributing those too.
That's
It's not
pretty
just an
cool.
email that you glance over or a website or whatever. So
One of my
yeah.
one of my favorite things that Justin Jackson does for their podcast is they call out their Patreon sponsors at the end of their show.
Oh, nice.
And it's kind of like that similar vein of saying, okay, like it's a better sponsorship way of like highlighting individuals or in this case
Hmm.
companies. But it's just nice little shout outs. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool, we could even kind of position it that way as like a shout out. Um, Even if it's not every listing, but it's like, hey, these companies are hiring, go check it out at, jobs.gorails.com, whatever it is, and list them out. And they get the shout out for, maybe an extra fee or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, That's super cool. Nice, man. Yeah, I
Yeah.
talked, and just some more news. I don't know if we've talked about this. I know, actually, I know we haven't talked about this publicly, but had some interest. A couple other people have reached out to me about job boards, which is kind of, it's funny because we haven't put out a lot about it, but have already asked, do you, is it available? Is this something that we could do? And so I kind of see the other side of this as a platform where anybody who has an audience, somebody who's a newsletter writer could potentially, start their own job board listing, and it's a way to monetize that isn't just directly your newsletter. So I've had a handful of conversations there, which I feel like are promising because so many people are building in public or building audiences, and they're looking for ways to monetize. And a great way to do that is to connect their audience with jobs. And so I don't know. I feel like there's some opportunity there. I don't know how much, but I do feel like we're positioned in a place where we can offer something and just see how it goes. And I think that's pretty cool. Like job
Yeah.
boards aren't
Yeah.
like crazy, sexy or anything, but I think it's pretty neat to be able to do that and help, creators be a part of the creator economy in a weird way. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, if they're building an audience, it makes perfect sense. Like I mean, it fits Go Rails now because I have a big audience and like it's something I can do to help people.
yep,
I don't plan to make really any money off this. It's just as long as it pays itself and can continue running, that's all I care about. And it'll be good to help people find jobs and stuff. Like somebody recently was hiring, and I think may end up hiring someone I recommended. And, it's awesome to be able to see that happening and just want to do that to as many people as I can. So I think that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And maybe that's the angle to take in the marketing and stuff is like you
yep,
have an audience, help them, you know, and maybe you make a little bit of money on the side. Um, but yeah, a lot of the job some of the job board stuff is just trying to be generic, like we work remotely kind of thing.
yep,
And then there's other ones that are like, here's your internal company job board that like you put on your site and you put at careers at whatever.com. And that's fine too, but I don't think we want to go that direction either. But you
right.
totally could. Like it's not any different than what we're doing right now. You just wouldn't charge for your employees to post jobs on your job board. So, maybe that ends up being something that we do in the future or whatever. But yeah, I like that direction a lot.
Yeah, I think it's nice because there are just so many areas I'm thinking about, even my limited experience in doing the micro SaaS growth course, where it's like those people are going to want to connect with operators, right? So people who are looking to build SaaS companies. Um, it's interesting just to look at all the areas that we can try to help connect folks. And I think that you and I have seen that that's really where a lot of our opportunities are going to be, is connecting folks. Like we don't have the bandwidth ourselves to do everything. Like we can try, but some of the best ways that we can be helpful or be involved is just by connecting good people and trying to be the connector between all those things. So I don't know, it's interesting looking at the job market or the job board project like that, looking at JobBoardly, not purely from the standpoint of like, oh my gosh, this thing is going to be this amazingly fast growing platform, but just as a really simple way to help connect folks. And yeah, hopefully it does pretty good. Hopefully it does pretty well, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that acquiring SaaS companies, like people who are acquiring will need help doing development unless
Yep.
if you acquire a Rails app, you're going to need a Rails dev or something, or customer support help or whatever it is. So you could totally, have a job board dedicated to helping people who are acquiring apps because they probably have some extra cash they want to invest,
Yeah.
over top of the acquisition to keep it running and everything because the original owner is not likely to stick around. So that's a cool idea too. There's a
Yeah,
lot of ideas.
I feel like you could do it too in a way where, I mean, we're getting a little outside of a normal job board here, but you could do it in a way that was not just skill based. It was kind of like, hey, I've had experience in these roles before. So you get a little bit more into the job seeker side of it too, where you say like, I'm actually looking to jump on a SaaS team, micro SaaS. I want to learn because I want to actually do this myself. But then you're just kind of help feeding that whole ecosystem from the ground. So you're saying, let's get some talented folks who are looking to get into micro SaaS. They could be indie hackers right now, and they're just looking for a project to jump onto where they can learn, they can grow, and you can hire them on for a project, or you can hire them on part time or full time. I think Sahil from Gumroad has done a really interesting job of like drawing these types of people out who are they're makers, they're builders, but they're until they can go full time on their thing, Gumroad is the perfect place for them to go work. And I could see that model really expanding over the next couple of years with the amount of indie hackers, the amount of building public people. Like they're still balancing their full time job, so while they're working on the side, maybe this would be a better alternative. They get to work hands on in another SaaS company and learn from them. And kind of wear a bunch of different hats, like doing various operating roles, while they also then try to apply those same learnings to their company, their side company. And from like an employer standpoint, I think that's great because you get really ambitious people, but you also know that their time with you isn't going to be forever. So your goal is to help them learn and to help them thrive. But in that learning, you will grow. Like your company's going to grow a lot too from that. So I don't know. It could be an interesting place to be in the future. Is the connecting point for people who are trying to build SaaS companies, like especially the smaller ones, and start building towards maybe your 5-10K MRR, and you want to try to grow that. I mean, this is the case for Hatchbox, right? So you guys are you're kind of in this place where you're trying to grow, but it can't all rely on you anymore.
Yep.
So how do you get a team involved, and what are the pieces you need and stuff like that? So maybe what I'm working on could eventually be a part of that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, because those are people who would be willing to take a low salary for, the learning experience and stuff. So that is a unique group of people who they're not looking for a full-time job. They're not looking for contracting. It's a different thing. And you could have a good marketplace to cater to those people who are looking for something like that. I would have totally been interested in opportunities like that just to learn. And that was where I pretty much took any job in the past, was just to learn. Like I knew I wasn't going to be there forever and whatever, but I could learn a compressed, ton of things in a compressed amount of time. And that was why it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I
Yeah.
feel like this is a great catch up. Yeah, this is fun. I'm hoping that we can get this out there in the next week or so, get it out to the world, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, that's the update on JobBoardly and where everything's at.
Yeah.
Thanks for following along.
Yeah. Next steps are really just iron out the payment stuff, and it should be live. So we're almost there finally. It's
We're
taken
almost
longer
there.
than you expect, but it doesn't everything.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
Cool.
All right.